Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, we talk to the woman who made history by leading the Marine Corps' storied drill team, and have footage from a special presentation. Check out the Silent Drill Platoon. Plus, a controversial video game based on one of the fiercest battles in modern history gets a release. See why it took more than 14 years to come out. And the Chinese Navy goes on a goodwill tour. See where a flagship vessel made its final stop. Also, how much is billionaire and philanthropist Craig Newmark planning to give to military charities? Find out what the founder of Craigslist plans to donate. It ain't small. With the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly. Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. I'm Andrea Scott. Since the late 1940s, the Marine Silent Drill Platoon has performed its ceremonies in full dress uniform in a very unique way, with no audible commands. With complicated moves involving spinning and tossing vintage rifles fixed with bayonets, the performance shows off the precision and coordination the Marines are capable of. The Story Drill Team got its first female platoon commander in 2022, and at a special presentation in front of the Iwo Jima Memorial in Washington, I caught up with her about what leading the platoon is like. The Marine Corps' Silent Drill Platoon Sunset Parade here in Washington, D.C. on Tuesdays is one of the unit's most iconic events. And this year, the storied platoon has its first female platoon commander. We caught up with Captain Kelsey Hastings before the show. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Captain. So you are the first female Silent Drill Platoon commander. What has that been like?
It's been a good experience. You know, it's been fun to travel around, see all the different people. And one of the big things about Silent Drill Platoon is that we do get the opportunity to travel the country and meet people who weren't going to be able to come out to DC and see our show, and influence them and inspire them and be an image that, you know, will be seared in their brain and memory and of what the Marine Corps is.
How did you end up in this job?
I happen to be 6 foot and at Combat Arms, and so I had a buddy who was stationed here before me and passed a good word, and I got here, again, 6 foot, Combat Arms, and so from there, just doing a good job at whatever I was given.
So 6 foot is the requirement to be in the Silent Drill Platoon?
So 5'10" is for the marching companies, and I made it by two inches.
Have you felt any pressure as the first female platoon commander, and are there any female Marines that are in the platoon?
So currently we don't have any female Marines. In the Marine Corps, it's a really small amount of women who are 0311s. Right now, I feel like the same amount of pressure, just like any other platoon commander. You know, I've got to do a job, and I got to do it well for my guys. You know, how I do makes their lives, you know, better or worse in any given way. So I wouldn't say it's anything too much at all, or too different or crazy.
What is the most nerve-wracking thing about being out here today for a show like this?
I get stressed more for my guys. I see how many hours that they spend and work, you know, trying to perfect everything that they are showing to all the, families out here today. So I just, gritting my teeth the whole time, knowing that they're going to do well, but, still that piece of nerves for them.
And what is the hardest part of the job for them, or the show even?
For them, I think, is being able to kind of eliminate what they see, the audience, the surroundings, the different field types. We'll do it on dirt or grass or turf or concrete, taking all those elimination or those different variables out and still providing a phenomenal show, and not kind of getting it out of their, forgetting, the performance and the appropriate steps.
Is there one move in particular that's the most difficult?
It honestly just depends. It's on each Marine. So some Marines, are phenomenal at spinning, while others are maybe more phenomenal at different parts of the performance, like exchange or a couple other items of it where they're really, really good, and it's just takes some more practice for them. So it really is dependent on the person.
You often have high caliber guests, I would assume. You had the President of the United States here a few weeks ago. Can you talk about that and other people who come see the show?
It's just another opportunity to show the public what we do and what we bring. As I mentioned earlier, it's them forgetting who they're there for, and it's like every show is going to be the best show that they've ever done, and thinking it's for the most important person in the world, or President of the United States, pretending like it's going to be that for every single show. So it's not until after, when we start to get the opportunity to interact and meet with the President of the United States, it gets pretty surreal. You're like, oh, I just did a really awesome performance for the president. So it doesn't set in until after.
Well, thank you so much, Captain. We look forward to the show this evening.
Good, I'm glad. I hope you guys enjoy it.
A Chinese Navy training ship with hundreds of cadets on board made a port call in the Philippines in mid-June. It was the final stop on a goodwill tour of 4 countries as Beijing looks to mend fences in the region. Cadets stood to attention on the deck of the ship as it arrived in Manila and was welcomed by the flag-waving Filipino-Chinese community. It was a rare visit for a Chinese naval ship to the Philippines, whose new government under Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has been strengthening ties with the United States and holding more joint military exercises. In February, it granted the American military greater access to the country's military facilities. China, meanwhile, has been increasingly assertive in pressing its broad claims to the strategic South China Sea, which has put it at odds with the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Brunei. In February, a Chinese Coast Guard ship aimed a military-grade laser at a Philippine patrol boat off a disputed reef, temporarily blinding some crew members and prompting the Philippines to intensify its patrols in the South China Sea. The ship's visit comes not long after joint U.S., Japanese, and Philippine Coast Guard law enforcement drills in the area. And earlier in June, a Chinese ship crossed the path of an American destroyer and a Canadian frigate. That was days after a Chinese J-16 jet performed what the Pentagon called an unnecessarily aggressive maneuver by passing in front of an American RC-135, leaving it shaking in the turbulence. U.S. President Joe Biden's administration has been working to reinforce alliances in the Indo-Pacific to push back against China's broad maritime claims, at the same time sending his top envoy to try to improve relations. The training ship's Philippine arrival was the end of a nearly 40-day voyage for nearly 500 naval cadets and sailors from China's Naval Academy. Official Chinese state media reported the journey was an opportunity for the cadets to visit foreign military vessels. University student Yan Lin Song saw the effort as a way to strengthen relations between China and the Philippines.
I feel very proud of my country. And I think the friendship of these two countries can be stronger and last forever.
When we come back, a controversial video game about a bloody Iraq war battle finally gets a release date. Find out why this realistic first-person shooter got held up.
The military and defense market is constantly evolving. Stay on top of the latest news with Sightline Media Group's live events. Continue to learn, understand new tools and technologies.
We're live. You're on in 3.
Defense, government, and industry leaders come together for successful and proven engaging events. You'll gain valuable insight, get the chance to ask questions, all from the comfort of your own home or office. Sign up for our events newsletters and receive alerts for upcoming live streams.
Welcome back to Defense News Weekly. The Second Battle of Fallujah in Iraq in 2004 is remembered as a fierce house-to-house battle that lasted weeks and cost the lives of dozens of American service members. It was some of the heaviest fighting the United States had seen since Vietnam. And at least 35 members of 3rd Battalion 1st Marines have since died by suicide. Recently, a first-person shooter game depicting the battle in a realistic fashion received a limited release on PC. The game had been stalled by controversy for 14 years since its initial development. Here with the story is Military Times editor John Simpkins.
A video game about one of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War is being released more than a decade after it first made headlines, and with no shortage of controversy on its heels. From Atomic Games comes 6 Days in Fallujah, a first-person shooter that was first announced in 2009, just 5 years after the brutal Second Battle of Fallujah, which claimed the lives of hundreds of Marines, sailors, Iraqi troops, British forces, and civilians. Various critics slammed the concept when it was first discussed, arguing that it cheapened the battle for the purpose of entertainment, and during a time when many of the battle's veterans were still serving in the global war on terror. The heightened controversy surrounding the game, which its developer originally billed as one of the most realistic military shooters ever created, prompted Konami, its original publisher, to drop the project entirely. But the game's developers pressed on, and eventually picked up a new publisher in 2021. To bring the game closer to reality, developers worked with numerous veterans of the battle, including troops and a number of Iraqi civilians who lived through it. Military Times was granted pre-release access to the game, and in addition to playing it, we spoke to Marine veterans of the battle, some of whom were portrayed in the actual game itself. Game developers promised a first-person shooter that will be the closest any video game has come to simulating what urban combat is like. Set in the embattled Iraqi city, it features claustrophobic, close-quarter combat spread across campaign modes that can be played from both the perspective of US troops and Iraqi civilians attempting to escape the city. The version we played centered around the fire team missions, 4-player co-op missions with various objectives that gamers can tackle with friends. Each player is assigned a role within the fire team that comes with unique weapons and abilities. Gameplay is built with environmental and technical accuracy in mind, and the stage for each mission is set with historical cutscenes and interviews with Marines, Iraqi Army veterans, and translators.
Every day, guys knew the first guy through the door was probably going to die.
I'm next. It's only natural for me to be next.
Game developers say what separates it from most first-person shooters is an emphasis on working together as a fire team. Failure to do so means success will be hard to come by. We spoke with Fallujah veteran Eddie Garcia, then of the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, and one of the Marines portrayed in the game, about his experience playing it. Here's what he had to say, quote, "I've been playing with 3 of my cousins. Their only exposure to fighting has been with other games. Our first 10 missions, we got smoked. They finally stopped running off on their own and agreed to listen to me and work as a group. Soon after that, we completed our first mission." Military Times spoke with a number of other veterans of the battle who discussed their experiences playing the game. Some gave positive reviews, citing the look and feel of the virtual version of the battle-scarred Iraqi city. From Marine veteran Jack Lipoff, who deployed to Fallujah in 2009, quote, "The city looks very authentic to what I recall Fallujah looking like, though less intact than when I was there." Others questioned the game's commitment to authenticity while choosing not to address the controversies of the time, including the use of white phosphorus munitions, the vast toll on the Iraqi civilian population, or the reason US troops were even there in the first place. From Fallujah veteran John Phipps, quote, "If you're claiming your game will take the player as close as they can to Fallujah without actually being there, you've just made an impossible promise. 6 Days in Fallujah has promised exactly that, and it absolutely cannot and will not deliver." Phipps added, "Americans need to accept that we shouldn't have been there. Afghanistan was justified. This wasn't. I was walking among giants and saw incredible acts of heroism and sacrifice, but those men shouldn't have been there in the first place. If you're going to claim to be realistic, you have to show the good and the bad." As for our takeaways after playing the game, the early access release version remains unpolished and because of that is unrealistic in some cases. Graphics and gameplay can be clunky at times, bogged down by rudimentary physics, frozen loading screens, or audio issues. Overall, the game seems unusually rough for a public release, and only time will tell if these issues are eventually ironed out. You can read our full review of the early access game, as well as our conversations with Fallujah veterans who sat down to play it on militarytimes.com. 6 Days in Fallujah is currently available as an early release on Steam. For Military Times, I'm John Simpkins.
Don't go anywhere. When we return, our personal finance expert covers how to head out on vacation without breaking the bank. Welcome back. On this edition of Money Minute, Navy Federal Credit Union personal finance expert Jeanette Mack gives you tips on staying on budget while on vacation.
85% of Americans plan to travel between June and August this year. And with the average week's vacation costing around $2,000 per person, it makes smart dollars and cents to strategize to make the most of your vacation and your budget. If you're flying, the best way to save is to buy tickets months in advance. You may have heard the best day to book is Tuesday. Not so anymore. The best time is when the deals are online. Bundling hotel with airfare is always a money saver, so use apps to set up travel package or airfare alerts to snag those deals as soon as they're available. Then open a travel savings account dedicated to your airfare, hotel, and expenses, and set up weekly or monthly deposits to stash that cash until you need it. Find one that earns the most interest to help pad that travel budget. And we can't forget about dining, excursions, and entertainment. Research and estimate what it'll cost for the trip so you can stay on track. Take advantage of happy hour deals and use gift cards too. Take the time to plan a truly money-saving vacation and enjoy the fun in the sun.
Thanks, Jeanette. We'll see you next week. To get more coverage of military and defense topics, get that tank and gear toward Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps Times.com, as well as DefenseNews.com. And to be the most informed rifleman in the drill platoon, sign up for our Early Bird Brief newsletter, compiled each morning to bring you the latest headlines. It's also an audio. Check out the podcast version out each weekday wherever you get your podcasts. And if social media is where you get your news, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. When we return, see how Craigslist founder Craig Newmark is giving back to the military community. Welcome back. When Craig Newmark started Craigslist in the 1990s, he wanted to share local events with friends. Despite rarely changing its look, the website's value grew over and over. Decades later, Newmark is now a billionaire philanthropist. He recently pledged $100 million to military charities and has already dispersed some $42 million. One of the benefactors, Blue Star Families, will see its operating budget nearly double. Our Capitol Hill Bureau Chief Leo Shane recently spoke to the influential website founder on how he hopes his massive donations will spur even more.
Thank you so much for sitting down with us and spending a little bit of time to talk about what the charity's doing, what the philanthropy organization is doing. What are you doing? $100 million for veterans groups is a lot of money. What's the goal here?
Well, on a gut level, my deal is that I realize that people are going to risk themselves, risk taking a bullet, maybe overseas to protect me. That means I owe them. I've come to recently realize how much families are a part of that, which means how much I personally owe families. Viewing that a little more abstractly from a national security point of view, force readiness depends on supporting the military families who support their service members. It means making sure we pay our debt to vets, and somehow this feels like something that I should be doing. On a gut level, we owe vets and families a lot. And on an abstract level, let's say, as I try to reclaim the concept of patriotism, at least in my own head, it means helping provide for force readiness. And it's kind of hard to ask someone to do their best if they're worried about their family back home, or if they're worried that they may be kind of abandoned as a vet. So this just feels right.
How much of this generosity is aimed towards not just helping these groups, but drawing attention to these groups, drawing attention to the community and its struggles and successes?
Yeah. Some of the value of citing big numbers and so on is to get people's attention, because there's a lot of things competing for our attention all the time. Some things matter a lot. Some things may not matter so very much. As a country, we owe vets and families a great deal. This is a way to get people's attention. Speaking as a nerd, I'm a little uncomfortable doing something like that to get people's attention, but I've been talking to advisors for some years now, and the idea is that sometimes you do want to do something to get people's attention.
So it's a lot more than just the money here. It's a real public relations campaign to an extent.
I've committed myself, meaning my time and energies, to this kind of thing, and I'm trying to get a little bit loud about it, because people in my industry, and I guess 1%ers everywhere, probably could pony up some cash, maybe do a little bit of volunteering or something. And my deal is that there are people who get successful and then may not want to share in that. And I just don't feel that way. That's not altruism. That's just following through with what I learned in Sunday school, I guess.
And that's all we have time for this week. Please visit us on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com for more coverage. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.